Hi there, hope you're having a pleasant day wherever you may be. Today I found myself back on that other road, that's right, the railroad. I'm riding Amtrak's California Zephyr from Chicago to Emeryville. I better hop on. The California Zephyr is an Amtrak long-distance route that connects Chicago to the Bay Area over a course of 2,400 miles over 7 states and takes approximately 52 hours to complete when it's on time. It goes without saying that the California Zephyr is one of the, if not the most scenic rail route in the entire Amtrak system. And oftentimes it's even considered one of the most scenic in the world. So as a result, there's about 1 billion resources out there, including YouTube videos, discussing this very topic. But at the same time, I thought it'd be criminal for me not to throw my Dodger hat into the ring and make one of my own. Now, this is going to be a little similar to my video of the Coast Starlight that I made a few years ago. If you'd like to check that out, go right ahead. But what do you say we get back to this one? Now, because the California Zephyr hits a lot of notes that I'm really interested in, this video is going to be all over the place. We're going to dive into the route itself. We're going to discuss a little bit of the history. We're going to talk about what it's like to ride the train in general. So let's see where this journey takes us, both literally and figuratively. As the old saying goes, the journey of 2,400 miles begins with a single station. In this case, Chicago Union Station. This incarnation was built in 1925 and was one of several rail facilities in the Chicago area up until 1971, when Amtrak was created and pretty much consolidated all of the Midwest routes through here. It is definitely the remnant of a bygone era where it was built on the grand scale, when that's how rail stations used to be built. It has tall columns. The Great Hall is a great place to wait for a train. It's huge, it's expansive, it's beautiful, it's naturally well lit. And it's also iconic in the sense that it's been used in a lot of movies. Most recently, probably the Man of Steel finale. I don't want to spoil the movie, but it takes place here at Chicago Union Station. And probably most iconically, the stairwell scene of The Untouchables. Now, there's 2 stairwells that kind of look the same. I'm not sure which one it was filmed on, so here's both. The station is also located near the heart of downtown Chicago, the Loop. So it's near sites like the Chicago River, just a few blocks from the Willis Tower, aka the Sears Tower. So if you have a long layover and you want to check out one of the world's tallest buildings, it's right there. And while I did heap lots of praise on the Great Hall, because I booked a room, I do have access to the Metropolitan Lounge, which is a first-class lounge and offers complimentary drinks and snacks, and is overall a pretty comfortable place to hang out while you wait for your train. Eventually the call is made for Amtrak train number 5, the California Zephyr, and you make your way out to the tracks. And once you're on board, it's not long before the train makes its way to navigate the maze of train tracks near Chicago Union Station and leave the skyline behind. Eventually the rail yards kind of give way to urban landscapes and eventually suburban landscapes as you start seeing all the little towns on the outskirts of Chicago. It isn't long before you leave that suburban sprawl of the Chicago area and your view quickly becomes dominated by corn, or in this case where corn would normally grow because it's wintertime right now. Mixed among all that corn or would-be corn, you get a little slice of Anytown, USA. Every once in a while you'll pass through a little town. It's got the little downtown, probably a church, definitely a water tower. Some have little grain silos, things like that. It's pretty common looking in this part of the country. But yeah, it's kind of cool to you whiz right through and move on to the next one. While we chug along through some of the, dare I say, less amazing scenery, let's jump a little bit into the history here. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning. May of 1869. The Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Summit, thus completing the Transcontinental Railroad. Mostly. The plan was to link Council Bluffs, Iowa to the Pacific coast. Unfortunately, there was no bridge across the Missouri, and the tracks only went as far as Sacramento. Now, in September of 1869, the tracks did make it all the way to the Bay Area, and by 1872, there was a bridge across the Missouri River. So it took a little while, but they finally did it. Those tracks were dubbed the Overland Route, and they started off in the Omaha area with Union Pacific laid tracks cutting across Nebraska into Wyoming, which is where they crossed the Rockies because it was a lot easier to cross there, into Utah, where they met the Central Pacific tracks at Promontory Summit. The Central Pacific tracks went through northern Utah and across northern Nevada, and when they got to California, they crossed the Sierra Nevada over at Donner Pass. Over the ensuing decades, other railroads built lines crossing the country, and even our California Zephyr today, it doesn't exactly take the same route, but it sort of embodies the same spirit of crossing from the Midwest over to the Bay Area. As for passenger trains, there were also several that cut across the country. But in 1939, 3 different railroads got together to form a temporary train that would get people from Chicago to San Francisco for the Golden Gate Exposition, and they called it the Exposition Flyer. Well, that turned out to be a very popular route, and in 1949, they decided to make it permanent, and thus the California Zephyr was born. Now, those 3 railroads were the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, which took the train from Chicago to Denver. Then there's the Denver and Rio Grande Western, which took the train over the Rockies to Salt Lake City. And then there was the Western Pacific, which took the train from Salt Lake City across Nevada, over the Sierra Nevada, and into the Oakland Bay Area. So like I said, there were already a lot of trains that were going from the Midwest to the West Coast. And back then, because trains were the only game in town, they liked to tout how fast they were. Well, unfortunately, the California Zephyr didn't have the quickest route, so they decided to take another approach. They decided to emphasize the scenery along the route, the luxury of the cars, and sort of touted it as a land cruise, which, for all intents and purposes, ended up being a great marketing move because quickly on, the California Zephyr was a very popular train to ride. One of the defining characteristics of the old Zephyr experience were the Zephyrettes. These were young ladies that were basically hostesses to the passengers and were there to meet their needs. It was a very popular concept at the time. Now, unfortunately, the popularity of the California Zephyr was sort of short-lived. By the 1960s, just like all the other passenger railroads, they were losing money with advancements in air travel, and people started to shift more toward their cars. Passenger rail was on the steep decline, and ultimately, by March of 1970, the final California Zephyr made its last run. And now enter Amtrak. In May of 1971, Amtrak was established to take on the burden of passenger rail from the different railroads. Now, most of the railroads agreed to this. However, there were a couple of holdouts, including the Denver and Rio Grande Western. They held out and didn't give Amtrak permission to run the route between Denver and Salt Lake City, so they kept doing it. Their reasoning was they didn't want to interfere with the freight traffic. Amtrak, wanting to have a Chicago to Bay Area route, ran the San Francisco Zephyr, which took the overland route through Wyoming. Now, eventually, they relented in 1983, and thus the Amtrak version of the California Zephyr was born. Eventually, the train reaches Galesburg, which is the first smoking/fresh air stop of the trip. You can step off, stretch your legs, but you're only there for a few minutes before you hop back on board, and it's back into corn country. Around 45 minutes or so of cruising through corn country, the train gets kind of slow, and that's for good reason. You're reaching arguably the first scenic highlight of the trip, the Mississippi River, the mighty Mississippi, the old Miss Deep River. But yeah, the train slows down to cross this creaky old metal bridge as you're crossing one of the most iconic rivers certainly in the country. But yeah, it takes a little while. Like I said, train's got to go slow across. And once you do cross the river, which takes a couple minutes, you find yourself now in Iowa, specifically Burlington, Iowa, which is the first stop of the Zephyr in its second state. And depending on which way you look in town, that town looks like it's seen some better days. During the late afternoon, our adventures in corn country continue as we chug across the state of Iowa with a couple of stops, including Ottumwa, which is a fresh air / smoke stop. The last one of the early evening. Well into the night, the California Zephyr continues across Iowa, eventually reaching the Missouri River, crossing into Nebraska, and making its way to Omaha. Now, most folks are probably asleep or getting ready to sleep, but this is your last chance to stretch your legs, get a smoke for the night. Now, what's interesting is that in the historical sense, Omaha is something of a major player, being right across the river from Council Bluffs, from the Transcontinental Railroad and all. But yet, it's served at nighttime in both directions for the California Zephyr. I know we aren't technically following the Transcontinental Railroad, but like I said, we're kind of following it in spirit. During the night, the train continues to race across Nebraska, and you wake up in Colorado, which is not only a new time zone, but also somehow flatter than the state before. But don't worry, the Colorado prairie is going to give way to something a bit more rugged soon enough. So the arrival into Denver is sort of unique because from either direction, the train has to stop and back into the station. It's a very slow and laborious process. So just when you think you're going to arrive, you're not quite there yet. But as you're pulling into the station, keep an eye on the south side of the tracks. Not only do you get to see the Denver skyline, but you also get to see Coors Field, the home of the NL West foe, Colorado Rockies. Denver Union Station was completed in 1914, but there's been a station at this site since as early as 1881. Now, during the heyday of rail travel, this was a booming place, but once rail travel began to decline, it kind of fell into obscurity, Amtrak really being the only tenant. That is until the 2000s when Denver decided to renovate it, put in a hotel, and make it sort of the light rail hub for the city. And now it's got kind of a resurgence going on. Inside, it's beautiful. Outside, it's beautiful as well. Sort of built in that old style that you don't really see of train stations anymore. So since Denver is sort of the first major city on the route, Omaha, there's a large influx of passengers getting on and off the train. So not to mention, this is where they refuel and stuff like that. So you're here for about 30 minutes or so. Shortly after Denver, the scenery makes a dramatic change, and you start to realize why the California Zephyr is as popular as it is. The route begins to gain new heights, both literally and figuratively, as the Zephyr sort of slithers its way up the front range of the Rocky Mountains, giving you amazing views, not only of the mountains that you're climbing, but the Great Plains that you just left. On a clear day, you get a pretty good view of the Denver skyline off in the distance, and it's just an interesting juxtaposition where you've got on one side jagged Rocky Mountains, on the other side you've got flatness all the way to Appalachia. Nevertheless, it's beautiful. As you climb the front range, one of the first highlights is going to be the Big Ten curve. What's interesting about that is that there is a series of hopper cars that have been left there to act as a sort of windbreak. Apparently winds can reach upwards of 100 miles per hour there, and that helps keep trains from being knocked over. It's also around this time that you'll reach what's sometimes referred to as the Tunnel District. And over the next 50 or so miles, you're going to pass through almost 30 tunnels as you make your way deeper into the Rocky Mountains. Now, up to this point in the journey, every single river and creek that we have passed or crossed or been alongside of has been flowing toward the east, but that's going to change shortly. Eventually, we reach the final tunnel of the Tunnel District, and it's a big one, the Moffat Tunnel. It is 6.2 miles long, and it's going to help take us over, or I guess under, the Continental Divide. You can tell when a tunnel is special because they give it a name, and in this case it was named after David Moffat, who had originally had the idea to build a tunnel through the Continental Divide as far back as 1902. Now, unfortunately, he never got to see his dream realized because he died before the eventual opening of the Moffat Tunnel in 1928. The tunnel was built to bypass the old route, which was over nearby Rollins Pass, which you can actually still see some remnants from the train today. Now, Rollins Pass was much higher elevation at over 11,000 feet compared to the 9,200 feet of Moffat Tunnel at its highest, which made it much more prone to snow and other winter disruptions, and was, even under good conditions, a very difficult and steep way to cross the Continental Divide. The building of the tunnel eliminated all of that and turned a journey from upwards of 5 hours under good conditions to just over 10 minutes in modern day standards. Now, even though the tunnel was built with ventilation systems in place, they ask that you sort of hunker down during that 10 minutes or so that the train takes to go through to avoid getting diesel fumes into the cars. Once the train exits the tunnel, you are immediately greeted with the Winter Park Ski Resort, which, for obvious reasons, is only open during the winter. Not long after the Moffat Tunnel is the Fraser Winter Park stop. Great place to stretch your legs and get some of that fresh mountain air. While going through the Rockies, the Sightseer Lounge Car will be your friend. Now, it goes by lots of different names. Simply the lounge car, the observation car, the cafe car. It's the car with the big windows that wrap around the roof. So some people mistakenly call it the dome car. It's one of those things that, it's like a rose by any other name would still smell just as sweet kind of situations, Whatever you call it, it's a great place to hang out. The lounge car is first come, first serve and open to all passengers on the train. It is pretty easy to get a seat when you're going through stretches like this or earlier in corn country, but when you're going over stretches like the Rockies, the crew knows that, hey, let's make it fair for everybody, and you really can't fault them for that. So different crews have different ways of circulating the seats for people, but just go along with it. It's the only fair way to do it. Me personally, I like to try to get in there for the front range and up to Moffat Tunnel, and then after that folks can take my seat. And then on the lower level of the lounge car is the cafe, where you can buy snacks, drinks, alcoholic beverages, food items like sandwiches, hamburgers, hot dogs. Just something to note that anything that needs to be heated will be heated in a microwave, so temper your expectations. Again, most of that stuff's pretty solid. At this point in the trip, when you see a river, in this case your first one will be the Fraser River, it's going to be flowing to the west because that's what continental divides do. Now the water's flowing toward the Pacific. Shortly after the stop in Grandview, Colorado, you're going to make a new friend, and that friend is the Colorado River. Yep, you are going to be spending a lot of time with that river over the next half day or so. Now, the river is, during the summer months, known for a lot of recreational activities like kayaking, whitewater rafting, fishing, and during those summer months, even though you're going alongside the river during the daytime, keep an eye out for a full moon, if you know what I mean. From what I understand, the whitewater rafters can get a little cheeky, Moon River. Now, it's also around this time that you start to lose your cell phone service for the next 2 hours or so, and that's probably a good thing, It forces you to look out the window and enjoy this beautiful scenery that you're going through with no distractions. There are some roads that come out here, but they're kind of roads off the beaten path that you have to make a little effort to get to, or you could be whitewater rafting down the rivers. But the easiest way to see this stuff is riding the train. It's a very unique opportunity to see parts of the Colorado River that not a lot of people get to see. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and I can't speak highly enough of it. Eventually, after a couple of hours, you do meet some new friends at Tot Cerro, One is the interstate, and the other is your cell phone service. But don't worry, your BFF, the Colorado River, is not going anywhere. They're still here with you, right by your side. It's also around this time that you reach arguably one of the most beautiful stretches of the trip, and that is Glenwood Canyon. And it's a 12-mile stretch where the train is following this really deep canyon. Beautiful natural setting with steep sides, jagged rocks. It's just a sight to behold. But the natural side of things is amazing, but the man-made stuff isn't too shabby either. On one side, you have the railroad. That's impressive on its own. And on the other side, you've got a 4-lane Interstate 70. As something of an aside, because it was so difficult to build this stretch of Interstate 70, this was the last section completed of Eisenhower's original interstate highway system. Eventually, the canyon culminates with the stop of Glenwood Springs. It is a chance to step off the train, stretch your legs, get a smoke if you want it. If you plan on visiting here, supposedly it's got some pretty amazing hot springs, and it's also the final resting place of gunslinger Doc Holliday. Shortly after Glenwood Springs, you'll notice that the route along the Colorado River sort of widens a bit. The scenery changes, and it stays that way for a bit until you start getting a little closer to a place called Tibet Canyon. There you'll start noticing the mountains are a little more flat-topped, and because you are kind of getting close to that Utah border, the style of rock kind of reflects that. It's a gorgeous little stretch. Eventually you come out of it and you make a little sprint and make it to your next station stop. The last stop in Colorado, Grand Junction, is also a fresh air stop, so feel free to step off, stretch your legs. Just after leaving Grand Junction, at this point you've sort of separated from the Colorado River, but don't fret. Just outside of town, you're going to duck under I-70 and meet up with your BFF for one last go of it. That's right, you're going to go along the Colorado for the next several miles in an area known as Ruby Canyon. Now, I think this is sort of an underrated section because usually the Zephyr, people talk about the Rockies, they talk about the Sierra Nevadas, but this stretch through the border of Colorado and Utah, I think is really beautiful. You're not too far from that Moab Arches National Park area, so you're kind of getting very similar scenery to that. Now, don't get too attached to your buddy. This is one last go of it because you are going to separate for good as you continue into Utah and get more glimpses of some of those flat top mountains that are pretty beautiful. Now, it's around this time that you're probably going to lose your sunlight, but that Utah scenery is a great backdrop for having dinner. At some point late in the night, you do reach the stop of Salt Lake City, Utah. Salt Lake City is another fresh air smoke break, but you get in pretty late even when you're on time. So not a lot of people are out here. Now, for a little Amtrak history, Salt Lake City used to be a very interesting stop because at one point that was the convergence or divergence, depending on which way you're going, of 3 separate trains. There was the California Zephyr continuing on to the Bay Area. Then there was the Desert Wind, which would go south toward Los Angeles through Las Vegas. And then there was the Pioneer, which would go north up through Portland up to Seattle. Now, at what point in the history they did change the Pioneer route to where that divergence happened in Denver, actually, and it would actually kind of somewhat take that overland route that we talked about earlier. Yeah, just a little Amtrak trivia there for you. Nowadays, this stop is much less complicated. The train leaves Salt Lake City in the wee hours of the morning, so unfortunately you cross things like the Bonneville soft flats in the dark. And when you wake up, you're going to find yourself in northern Nevada in what's known as the Great Basin. Now, I know we made a big deal about the Moffett Tunnel and crossing the Continental Divide and the water flows toward the west now. Well, this is the exception. It's called the Great Basin for a reason. It doesn't go anywhere. The water has no outlet to the ocean. So, here's a little exception to that rule. One thing about crossing the Great Basin is that just the nature of the province, the basin and range type topography, it's long stretches of just kind of flatness, and every once in a while you come up to a mountain range and you got to kind of deal with it, and you get some nice rugged beauty out of it. So the whole thing has its own sort of rugged charm to it, but yeah, it's an interesting place to go through. And with that rugged charm comes spotty cell service, so prepare to kind of get it and lose it for stretches of time. So now while we go through a stretch of the Great Basin that is not quite as rugged and not quite as charming, let's dive a little bit into the rail riding experience, just some of the basics and what you can expect on the train. For Amtrak's West Coast trains, they use what are known as superliner cars, and those are double-deck cars. The top level is for the passengers, bottom level is more or less for taking care of business. That's where you're going to board, but then you're going to take stairs up to the upper level, and if you want to pass between cars, it's on the upper level that you do that. As far as accommodations, let's just start with the most basic, and that would be coach. That's basically just a seat. However, it is more comfortable than an airline seat because you have much more leg room. The seat is a little more comfortable. It's a little wider, and it reclines further. You have a little tray table for all your needs. In the coach cars, majority sit on the upper level. On the lower level are where the bathrooms are at. Now, I will admit that on a long journey like the California Zephyr, by the end of that third day, because so many people are using it, the restrooms can get a little grimy, but that just kind of goes with the punches. If everyone does their part, it's less grimy. Next accommodations would be the sleeping car. Now, there are 4 different types of rooms. There's the family bedroom, which is on the lower level and is really designed for 2 adults and 2 smaller children. Then there's the special bedroom, which is designed for people with accessibility needs. Again, that's on the lower level. And then the other 2 main types are the bedroom, which is it's very spacious, it's comfy. It's got its own bathroom / shower. It's got its own sink. So it would be nice to ride in there, but it's a little out of my price range. So I end up going with the roomette. Now, the roomette in the daytime configuration has 2 seats facing each other. There's a little table in between the 2 that has a checkerboard for some reason. Every single room I've ever been in has had a little checkerboard built into it. I don't know why they think that people are walking around with loose checker or chess pieces, but whatever. It also has some reading lights, some lights for the cabin in general. There is one electrical outlet, so if you're with someone, make sure that you can share, or do what I do and bring a little power strip that I plug in, and it gives me a couple more of the things that I can charge at once. Now, don't put anything too crazy, but just charging your basic stuff should be fine. Now, like I said, there is plenty of room in here to meet all your needs. However, if you are traveling with another person, either A, make sure you know them really well, or B, you're gonna know them really well by the end of the trip, because it's a little tight, but like I said, you just make it work. As far as the nighttime configuration for the room, space does become a little bit more at a premium. So those 2 seats that were on the bottom during the day push down together to form the lower bunk, and the upper bunk folds down from the ceiling, and that's where all the bedding is kept. So you bring down a mattress for the lower, and then there's a mattress on the upper. The upper bunk is a little tight, so a smaller person gets the top bunk. Like I said, there are a couple stairs that if you're using them for storage, you just got to move that stuff in order to climb up on top. It's a very simple process to convert the room. There is a sleeping car attendant that if you need help doing that, they can do that for you, or if you've ridden the train a couple times, it's a pretty simple process. And like I said, that space does become a premium, because once that lower bed is down, there's not a lot of room between the door and the bed to like move around, change your clothes, things like that. So chances are you're probably going to change clothes on the bed if you didn't already, or if you went to the restroom or something. As far as something as simple as the door to the room, it slides and it locks from the inside. Traveling by train is one of those last few things where trust is heavily employed. Use common sense, cover up valuables, don't do that. There is a curtain you can close, but when you leave, there's no locking mechanism to the door. And depending on how old the car is, Sometimes you'll come back and the jostling of the train will have opened up that door while you were gone. But as long as you kept everything hidden, you should be good. Everyone's pretty trusting. The crew is very aware of who should be in the car and who should not. So now, majority of the rooms are on the upper level of the car. However, on the lower level, there are a handful more, and that's also where majority of the restrooms are, and you have access to a shower. So it's kind of nice on a longer trip to at least be able to rinse off. You know, you want to go full on shower, go right ahead, but it's nice to at least have that option. Speaking of the restrooms, they're kind of snug. It's a little tough to maneuver in there. There's two sets. If you have an older car, it's not designed with a lot of room in mind. If you get one of the refurbished ones or one of the newer cars, the way they angled things and kind of made things a little smaller but still effective, kind of maximizes how much space they can get out of it. So, you know, with any luck, you'll get one of the newer ones. After spending the morning in the Great Basin, you eventually reach Reno, Nevada. Reno is a fresh air / smoke stop, so you can get out and stretch your legs. Now, the powers that be decided to route the train through a large trench through the city to minimize disrupting traffic, so you really don't get to see much of the biggest little city in the world. Damn. Shortly after leaving Reno, the train follows the Truckee River into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, the modern version of the California Zephyr crosses the Sierra Nevada over Donner Pass, and that was obviously named after the ill-fated wagon party back in the 1800s. But it was also the route chosen by the Central Pacific when they built the Transcontinental Railroad back in 1869. Like I said, we're kind of doing the same route in spirit, and in this case, quite literally, because the original California Zephyr did not cross here. It branched off somewhere in northern Nevada and eventually crossed the Sierra Nevada over a route known as the Feather River route. Now, that was considered very scenic, but I gotta say, I like the idea of the history behind this one. Going over the Sierra Nevada, there's really not a lot of stops. You make one stop early on in Truckee, and if you don't have any delays, you go about 2.5 hours until you're over the mountain range and make a stop in Colfax. So if all things go well, you get a nice smooth journey. However, that doesn't happen very often. There's a lot of delays that are found.
All right, I got some updates for you here.
As I was saying, the crossing of the Sierra Nevada is notoriously riddled with disruptions as of late, whether it's weather related or rail traffic related. So it's very easy to get disrupted going over and delayed, which is why I prefer going east to west, because if you're going west to east, this delay is at the very beginning of your trip and it's going to cost you the rest of the way. If you're going east to west, it's toward the end and you have a better chance of still seeing stuff in daylight. So let's see how that goes today. Now, some of the perks for riding in a sleeping car start before you even get on the train. Like I said earlier, at Chicago Union Station, there is access to the Metropolitan Lounge, so you can take advantage of that. Once you are on board, one of the biggest features is that your meals in the dining car are included. So that's a great segue to let's talk about the dining car. The dining car is where they serve sit-down breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and those meals are at set times. They'll announce it, and it's determined by the train schedule. So if the train's boarding at like 2 in the afternoon, like we did, your first meal is going to be dinner that day. If you're arriving into Emeryville at 4 o'clock, your last meal is going to be lunch that day. As for how it's ran, like I said, they'll make announcements for when breakfast and lunch are going to happen. You'll walk into the car, you'll wait at the end, and the attendant will flag you down and tell you where to sit. Now they do employ community seating in the dining cars, so if you're less than a party of 4, chances are you're going to make some friends. It's sometimes good, sometimes it's bad. I've had some really great conversations with some of my meal companions, and I've also had some really clunky and awkward ones as well. So you kind of take that with the grain of salt and just treat it as part of the rail experience. When it comes to dinner, the dining car attendant will make an announcement, and he'll go throughout the cars to hand out dinner reservations. Basically just how many people and what time. They'll give you a little slip, and he'll make the announcements of, hey, okay, 5:30 dinner reservations, make your way to the dining car, and you'll do that, and same process as at lunch. As far as the food itself, I have to say that I like it. I think it's pretty good. I am grading a little bit on a curve because they do have limited resources available to them. But given that constraint, I think they put out a pretty good product. Now, like I said, the meals are included for the sleeping car passengers. If there is space available, they will open it up to people in coach that want to eat in the dining car. While the meal itself is included, gratuities are not. So usually I like to have some small bills before I board to be able to leave as a tip after each meal. The staff is kind of limited. It's been whittled down over the years. But the staff that remains in the dining car, they are working hard. They're hustling. Overall, having a meal in the dining car on a moving train as you're speeding through the countryside is one of those like classic Americana, like everyone's got to do it once. You know, it's nice to just see the scenery roll by as you're having a nice meal and possibly making some new friends. Once you finally make it over the Sierras and into the foothills on the western side of the mountains, it's pretty much kind of a straight shot all the way to Sacramento. Sacramento is the last opportunity to step off the train and stretch your legs before making the way to Emeryville. Sacramento also represents where the current California Zephyr crosses the path of the former California Zephyr. Our route is going to continue off to the Bay Area and sort of hug the water as we go through Martinez and Richmond and eventually reach Emeryville. It's obviously, water is always nice. It's a scenic route, and I approve. I like it. However, the old route continued south through the Central Valley and eventually at around Stockton started to cut toward the coast and cut through an area known as Altamont Pass. And once it made it over that small mountain range, it went a little northward and made the final stop in Oakland, California. Interestingly enough, the original transcontinental route, when it finally did connect to the Pacific coast, it took a very similar route compared to the original California Zephyr. As you skirt along the San Francisco Bay and you approach the final stop of Emeryville, look across the water if it's a clear day, and you might catch a glimpse of the Golden Gate Bridge way off in the distance. At last, the California Zephyr arrives at its final destination, Emeryville, California. Emeryville is the final stop for the Amtrak version of the California Zephyr. Now, obviously, since it was built in 1993, it doesn't have that grand, beautiful architecture that some of the other stations that we visited on this trip have. But inside, it's got a nice little waiting room. It serves a lot of trains, and if you're gonna continue your journey on to San Francisco, this is where you would catch your bus. So one last little note of history is that, like I said, the current version of the California Zephyr stops here in Emeryville. However, it used to traditionally stop in Oakland, and under Amtrak, that's taken the form of a couple different stations. There was the old station, which was damaged during the Loma Prieta quake, which you can still see from the train, the remnants of it, I guess. And then for a while, it was Jack London Square, where they built a new station in 1995. But after a few years of going past the Amtrak yard, only to reverse the train back, they decided, hey, you know what, let's just end it in Emeryville. It's a nice little station, good access to the bay and stuff like that. So that's what happened. The original version of the California Zephyr, the Western Pacific Depot, was actually in the middle of the street, not too far from here. Yeah, they would pick up passengers and drop them off in the middle of the street. I was amazed when I saw it too. And one element of rail travel in America riding Amtrak is pack your patience. There are 1,000,001 reasons that can delay a train, and so many of them are out of the control of the crew that are running the train. So a lot of times they're in the dark, they don't know why, they're waiting to get information just like you. But yeah, delays are not uncommon. Problems with equipment are not uncommon. I have been on this train in the last year. This is my third trip, and 2 of the trips we've had dining car problems. One of them we only missed a meal. They were able to fix the problem and got the rest of our meals. On this trip in particular, we had to ditch the dining car in Denver, and even though the meals are included for the room, the poor crew had to think on the fly, get supplies in, and our meals were definitely less than we would have gotten in the dining car, but we were fed. For the California Zephyr in particular, I personally like riding it from east to west for a couple of reasons. First, you get that corn day out of the way. Now, don't get me wrong, it's fine to look at, but it's not the most exciting. So you get that, boom, out of the way. And then your second and third days are the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada, respectively. Now, if you're getting delayed, which, like I said, is not uncommon, you can still see majority of the scenery, even with a pretty lengthy delay, going west. If you're going east and you get a lengthy delay, you might be going through the Rockies in the dark, which kind of defeats the purpose, right? So you just have a higher likelihood of seeing the sights that you want to see during the day going toward the Pacific coast. Overall, riding the California Zephyr is an amazing journey. It's got a lot of scenic highlights. I understand why it's one of the most popular rail routes in the country, and dare I say even the world. So if you ever get the opportunity to ride it, go for it. Well, that does it for this one. Thanks for joining me on this trip aboard Amtrak's California Zephyr. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you found it informative. And as you can see, it's a beautiful ride no matter what season you take it in. With that said, I guess I'll see you on the next one.